Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we are broadcasting live from the beautiful Gilliland State Park here in East Central Ohio. I'd like to remind all of you to please press the follow button located at the top of the web page if you'd like to be notified 1 hour prior to the start of each Ohio Exopolitics. The music that you hear on Ohio Exopolitics is performed by your host, and CDs are available on request. Tonight our guest is Amy Vickers, who has been working with the Star Child Project since 2004, and is currently the Chief of Operations in the U.S. The Star Child Project is an informal organization that has been working with an unusual 900-year-old skull, known as the Star Child skull. In that time of 12 years of working on it, experts have studied the skull and come to the incredible conclusion that it is unlike anything previously seen on the planet Earth. And I'd like to welcome Amy Vickers to the show tonight. Amy, how are you this evening?
I'm great, thanks, Mark. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm very glad to have you here. And what part of the country are you located in tonight?
I am talking to you live from Panama City Beach, Florida.
So you guys are enjoying some warm weather?
We are. We're finally past the oil spill and finally past the bizarre cold weather, and we're back to beautiful sunny Florida again.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. And before we get into the Star Child skull, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, certainly. I actually came to be involved with the project while I was holidaying in London. I was an archaeology student in Australia and was visiting London over my summer holiday, and I just happened to be staying in the same boarding house as Lloyd Pye, who is I guess you'd say the head of the project. He's the research coordinator. And he gave me a copy of his brilliant book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and showed me the Star Child skull and started explaining it to me, and I was just hooked from day one. And so I signed on right then and there back in 2004 and haven't looked back since.
Well, that's fascinating. It was almost like fate put you two together, is that correct?
Absolutely.
So you've been working on the project since 2004. How has it felt to be on this project?
It's like anything in life, Mark. It's got its ups and its downs, but it seems like every few months we come up with some amazing new discovery, some hint that we're moving in the right direction, and it's just really always become more and more clear that we have something really amazing here. I was lucky I joined the project in 2004 after they'd gone through all the initial setbacks of, is this unusual, is it a deformity, should we just put it in a box in the garage and forget about it? And by the time I came on board, they knew for sure this was something really incredible, really amazing. Lloyd Pye was actually in London doing some very sophisticated, working with some people that were doing some very sophisticated testing on it. And at that time, it just became blindingly clear to everyone that no one had seen a skull like this, no one had seen components inside bones, anything like what we had in the Star Child skull. So it's really been great to be a part of.
But doesn't it seem in some ways that science is almost working against what you guys are trying to find out?
Unfortunately, sometimes that's the case. We're incredibly lucky that we have our own team of very highly credentialed scientists and experts who are willing to step up and say, okay, I realize my profession may not agree with doing this research, but I think that everything deserves to be explained, everything of interest deserves to be researched. And so they very bravely stepped forward and said, all right, I'll do this test and I'll do that test and I'll write this report. And so although we have had some resistance from elements within the scientific community, we've really been lucky in finding our own superhero PhDs that have come to our rescue and been willing to do some work for us.
That's interesting. It's interesting to hear that you have some support, because when I listen to some of Lloyd's lectures, it does seem that there's a certain group of people within the scientific community that this skull rocks their world a little bit too much, and it almost seems like we have irrational skepticism. Can you comment on that?
I wish I could say that wasn't the truth. I wish I could say every scientist out there is just looking for the truth, looking to find new mysteries to uncover. But I have to admit that in general, for every one person that helps us or takes a serious look at the skull, there's probably 20 or 30 or 50 who dismiss it or who won't even look at it. So it certainly has been an uphill struggle. I think that Lloyd Pye probably has a different perspective than I do, because he worked with it in those early years when they just couldn't get anyone to take a look at it. The reason that Lloyd Pye, who is an alternative researcher, he's not a PhD, he's not a scientist in that sense, he's just someone who has a lifetime worth of independent research on all kinds of subjects that you wouldn't necessarily find in a textbook. Things like, what is the real evidence for Bigfoot? What is the real evidence for aliens? What is the real evidence for crop circles? And he takes a very analytical look at each of those things, but he doesn't have those formal official kind of credentials that everyone loves so much. He doesn't wear a lab coat. But he had that reputation for being very scientific in his methods. And the skull owners, Ray and Melanie Young of El Paso, Texas, Melanie herself was a neonatal nurse at the time that they inherited the skulls, and so she knew that there was something really unusual about the Star Child skull. And for those of you who are listening who aren't aware, the Star Child skull is a real, true bone skull. It was found 900 years ago in the Copper Canyon, it was found in 1930 in the Copper Canyon region of Mexico, but it is 900 years old. And we've been researching it, as Mark said in the beginning, for 12 years now, but it is actually a real, genuine skull, but nothing about it is really human. It's human-like. It has the basic parts of a human skull. All of them look different. They're all radically different from a normal human skull. And so Melanie, as a neonatal nurse, was there looking at it saying, you know, I've seen a lot of deformity. I know what that looks like. This doesn't look like anything I've seen before. And so she took it to the doctors that she worked with. She took it to friends. She took it to everyone that would listen. And to a person, they said, you know, this is nothing special. Just put it back in the cardboard box. Don't worry about it. This is a waste of your time. But she knew instinctively that there was more to it than that, and so that's why she sought out Lloyd Pye, who had this unusual reputation. And that was back in 1999, and he's been working on it ever since. So in those early days, they really encountered a huge amount of resistance, and it took time to accumulate people that were willing to do the research, that were really qualified to do it. And so I've just been spoiled rotten by coming in once that network was already in place, and we've just added to it since I've been here.
Can you give us a brief overview of Lloyd Pye's work?
Oh gosh, I can try. It's hard to be brief because he's been working on this for so long. My understanding is that he first became interested in these alternative things way back in high school, and going through college he saw what's called the Minnesota Iceman, which was allegedly a Bigfoot that was shot and killed and frozen in an ice chest and taken around the South in, I think, the 70s as a sideshow attraction. And Lloyd Pye visited it and went through several times, paid his money and went through the line several times, getting a really good look at it, and was just absolutely convinced this is real, this is a Bigfoot, this is something that I need to learn more about. And of course after that there was a big stink, and they apparently or allegedly hid or got rid of the real corpse and started taking a fake one around because people started talking about murder charges. But Lloyd is adamant that the one that he saw was indeed a real living creature, and I believe he talks about that in his book, Everything You Know Is Wrong. But he just from that early age knew that there was more to the world than what you get taught in science class or history class, and has carried that research through his entire life until he published the book that I keep mentioning, Everything You Know Is Wrong, back in 1997. and it's still available. It's still very popular, and you can get a lot more information from that book on his website, LloydPye, LLOYDPYE.com. And I just can't begin to go over it in complete detail, but the bottom line is that he is an intervention theorist. That basically means that he's looked at the totality of the evidence, the ancient writings, the historical documents, the physical evidence in things like the pyramids and Stonehenge and other megalithic structures, the proponents of evidence about Bigfoot, hominoids, whatever you want to call them, these unrecognized primates that we have roaming around the planet Earth, and has come to the conclusion that at some point in our history, aliens came, took the native primates from planet Earth that we think of as Maussan apes, that we know now as Bigfoot and Sasquatch and Yeti and the Abominable Snowman, took the DNA from those primates, mixed it with their own DNA, and then produced the human race. And if you follow that through, then it explains things like the mitochondrial eaves. It takes away the need for the scientific explanation that we had a bottleneck where almost all the humans died out, and that's why we're all so genetically similar. It sounds really far-fetched to try and sum it up in just a matter of a few minutes, but if you read the book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, it is truly terrifying the amount of evidence there actually is for this, and it's not, you know, Joe Bob Farmer out in his field saying that aliens came and killed his cattle or something like that. It's not anything that has any ambiguity. It's not something where you can say, oh, well, you just made that up. It's translations from the oldest writings that we have on planet Earth. It's evidence from our own DNA. It is things you just can't argue with. And so for anyone that's interested, I know it sounds really far-fetched, and that's because I'm having to summarize an incredible amount of information very, very quickly. But it is an incredibly intriguing theory with a surprising amount of evidence to back it up, and it's certainly worth educating yourself about.
Well, I don't think you'll shock anyone that listens to this show, because we kind of focus on the strange and unusual, so they won't be too surprised. Eventually, the Star Child skull ended up with a couple named Ray and Melanie that were interested in the study of extraterrestrial life. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yes, I can. Ray and Melanie are actually at the UFO Congress in Arizona at the moment today, and they're just wonderful people. I can't say enough good about them. As I mentioned, Melanie was, at the time that they received the skulls, a neonatal nurse, and so she had that medical background, and both of them were MUFON members, Mutual UFO Network members, and they just took one look at it and said, you know, that looks like the kind of skull you'd expect to find in a gray alien. It's got that typical gray alien heart-shaped kind of a face, you know, the big top of the skull, the very small, narrow lower face, the very big, unusually shaped eyes, and it actually has a crease down the middle of the skull. It's literally a heart-shaped skull. And so that really intrigued them, and they just very trustingly turned it over to LloydPye, who thankfully has been just a real stand-up guy and done a wonderful job of trying to get it researched. And they've really been kind of the unsung heroes of the piece, as they've provided constant support and encouragement, and at the same time allowed him the freedom to do the research that needed to be done and take the skull wherever it needed to go to get that research done on it.
I've heard Lloyd discuss in his lectures that the sinuses of this skull are extremely small, such that it would have been hard even for this being to have any kind of voice. There would be no resonance. So he theorizes that maybe this individual was using some kind of telepathic communication. Is that possible?
Well, unfortunately, from a scientific standpoint, I can't say whether telepathic communication is possible or not. I don't have enough evidence on that. But I will elaborate on what you said. The Star Child skull is actually completely missing the frontal sinuses. You have a balloon of sinus. It's basically an empty